I'll conclude from that with George H.W. Bush, Bush 41. Bush 41 used to say famously, "I don't do the vision thing." He had been Reagan's vice president. He knew he couldn't compete with Reagan in terms of rhetoric. He felt awkward at trying to give these very dramatic type speeches that Reagan gave. And so he explicitly avoided it. In November of 1989, when the Berlin Wall comes down, it's a cause for great jubilation. And many of Bush's advisors come to him and they say, "We have to make political capital out of this." Bush's response was, "No, I'm not going to dance on the wall. I'm not going to gloat and isolate Gorbachev." Instead, a month later, he met with Gorbachev at the summit in Malta and began a process which oversaw one of those remarkable changes in the history of the 20th century, which is a Germany and Europe divided by a Berlin Wall and an Iron Curtain with 400,000 heavily armed Soviet troops in East Germany. From that picture in 1989 to 2 years later, a Germany which was reunified inside NATO without a shot being fired was a truly dramatic change. Most people thought it couldn't be done. Margaret Thatcher opposed it. Brent Scowcroft initially opposed it. And yet Bush presided over this by just very careful, low-keyed management. And in that sense, I think if I look at these two leaders, transactional leaders, Eisenhower and Bush, they weren't flashy, they weren't transformational in their objectives, but they were extremely good managers. They had what I call contextual intelligence, which is they had a background and knowledge which allowed them to understand how foreign policy really works. And foreign policy is particularly complex as an area for leaders to make decisions because it involves not merely understanding the distribution of power and the different cultures of a number of different countries, but how they interact with each other as an international system. And in that kind of complexity, it's extremely important that a leader have contextual intelligence. Another way of putting it is that when you're faced with that kind of complexity, perhaps the first principle for a leader to remember is the Hippocratic Oath. Above all, do no harm. Unless you know that your actions are going to make things better, it's better not to act. And in that sense, it's interesting comparing the two presidents Bush. George W. Bush, Bush 43, came into office not interested in foreign policy. You remember the 2000 campaign had almost no foreign policy in it. But he was transformed as the country was transformed by 9/11. The shock basically gave a new sense of mission. And he developed a vision which was to get at the roots of terrorism in the Middle East by overthrowing Saddam Hussein and creating a democracy in Iraq, which would then spread throughout the region. Alas, he was unable to implement the vision, a little bit like Woodrow Wilson with too ambitious a vision, which fails. His failure, I think, set things back. I suppose the moral of this story would be that we're better off if we would have a president who has the ability to manage like a transactional leader and the ability to promote a vision and change like a transformational leader, and perhaps sometime in the future some genetic engineer will find out how to produce that kind of leader. What we do know is, comparing the two Bushes who shared half their genes, that thus far nature hasn't solved the problem.